Hey friends, it's Coach Ernie from the Trader of Futures, and I am more or less compelled by some people to address my stance on Bitcoin and why I've decided not to provide further volumetric analysis on that particular asset type specifically, and perhaps to, kind of give it a rest on the technology in general, at least for now, until I see things change. So what I need to do, first of all, is kind of give you my view of what I think the future of blockchain, or more accurately, distributed ledger technologies, where it is right now, and where we are in that timeline, and why I think that it really is kind of a waste of time to put too much more effort, time, and resources into this when there are so many other things that can benefit people now. All right? So I guess I'd have to put it in terms of phases and where we are in terms of phases. And, there is that very early on phase that we've kind of matured through. And it was really quite long in terms of a normal technology timeline. Considering that Bitcoin was first introduced back in 2009, it's taken 10 years for us to achieve this point here. Now, but where we are now is just really, perhaps if I were to break this down and say there's a total of about 5 phases that I'm going to get through in terms of the levels of maturity of this technology. And we are at the very beginnings of that level of maturity. I mean, right now, it's all about awareness. Companies, they're intrigued with the promise of improving their processes. And they want to know, how these improvements can benefit them. So they're initiating different types of exploratory projects and investigating or investing in people and technology. They want to become educated so that they can make future decisions on whether or not there is actually some ROI in this technology. How does it kind of fit? Look at all the different use cases. Now, it is without question there has been tremendous hype over the past year, and I fell prey to a lot of that hype. I pride myself in being a visionary, someone who has been involved in technology for nearly 40 years, at the very top of the heap. It's not like I don't understand this stuff. I understand it explicitly. I understand where it's going, and I've made it my job. Actually, it has been my job for the past 20 years to advise people in corporate America, global corporations, about technology, new initiatives, and whether or not it has some efficacy. But the hype over the past year was just so over the top, and I think that Bitcoin and distributed ledger technologies were severely oversold. At least for now. I mean, just way, way, way too early to understand exactly what the next big thing's going to be. Now, of course, this is phase one. This is where we're at. We're going through some growing pains. There were all these fraudulent companies out there and just people just piling in, recognizing that there was a lot of money to be made, and money started pouring in. New people, there was an awareness out there. And we still have that awareness being perpetuated and fired up by a few of the mainstream media, particularly places like Bloomberg and CNBC, Forbes as well. There are these stories that keep on getting pushed into our face, like BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, as if they're taking some substantive position in blockchain technology or distributed ledger. And while they are looking at it, there is no substantive move into these technologies by these behemoths. Trust me, there isn't. The SEC is still trying to figure out, how they're going to, if they're going to actually alter their policies in order to accommodate these technologies, and they're looking at it as just too early. There are a few politicians that are willing to look at it as well, and they're just not there yet. They are completely in the dark. They really don't have the technical expertise nor the vision. I know that's hard to believe that a politician doesn't have the vision. But let's talk about what the next phase might be. And that's a pretty big step. And that's where global companies start adopting blockchain and distributed ledger technologies because they've actually found something that is promising. And this is actually where we aren't yet. There are some companies that have clearly transitioned from phase one, and they're trying to take those first steps into phase two, and you can consider these guys the early adopters, but they're simply not there yet. There is no public blockchain or distributed ledger technology out there with any kind of standardization, standard interfaces, or any kind of regulatory clarity, or really any kind of return on investment that any company can latch onto. They don't even understand the cost of resources and the cultural shift that one might have to employ inside their organization. The different business models that would have to be adopted and, first of all, learned about and then adopted. And whether or not they would actually work. There's just all this hype that they've said, yeah, blockchain, and they've been sort of browbeaten into believing, because of media hype, that blockchain is definitely in our future. It is going to be bigger than the internet. Where's the proof? I don't see it. So let's say that we get beyond this, that we start seeing, now this would be like phase three, we start seeing early adopters benefiting from blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, call them DLTs, that commerce has now started to fully integrate cryptocurrencies as a standard mix into all the type of payment systems and transfer protocols, and everyone, virtually anyone, can transact in crypto as well as your normal fiat. And companies have distributed applications, what we would call dApps, that are becoming commonplace, that are working, and those working dApps are starting to be adopted. Maybe some of them turn into, or we start realizing some of these more killer applications, maybe an online decentralized store, for instance, like a decentralized Amazon. Of course, this decentralized Amazon would naturally have to take over Amazon. But assume that these things start existing and people become more educated about the benefits and understanding of what it really means to have a distributed or decentralized economy. You know, this is where I have the big disconnect. Because this is such a disruptive technology, both in its implementation and what it implies in terms of how people will have to change the way they do things, and the way business models will have to necessarily change. It's really difficult to envision what this might look like, or where it will go, how it will evolve. But let's say that we do get there. And now we're into this sort of next phase, phase 4, where adoption starts spreading across global entities. And at some point, most companies have at least some initiative or are completely dependent upon this technology or some derivative of the technology. There are both public blockchains, there are private blockchains, there are standardized interfaces. Everyone knows how to deal with it. Only the most basic brick and mortar stores and smaller entities, or those resistant, or for some reason maybe their use case simply is incongruent with it, are left behind, or not, or just choosing not to get involved. We start seeing corporate cultures change, business models change, whole new areas of study and academia start changing to accommodate this new economy, and adopting this new paradigm. This I see as, let's say that everything just rolls as fast as it possibly can. I don't see this happening for at least a decade or more. Then, finally we get to this point where we're in this final stage. stage 5, where everyone has incorporated DLTs into their lives, so it's pervasive that most don't even know that it actually exists, that it is like the internet is today. It is just assumed. It is there. It is part of our everyday life. It has been so totally integrated into everything we do. The idea of decentralization starts spreading outside of technology. Borders break down. Governments start adopting the ideas. It becomes completely decentralized and homogenized. So what are the benefits? I can't even imagine what that future is going to be like and what it actually means. And whether or not there are some philosophical questions that we've kind of sort of glossed over, and I've actually addressed that in a previous video. I don't believe that the whole idea of a trustless, or this what people are calling the new technology of trust, that somehow we are now trusting, we're replacing the trust that we have in individuals with the trust that we're going to have in this network. To me, that seems antithetical, and it seems, it almost seems evil that we're substituting technology for people, our relationships. We no longer, I mean, we're already there in some ways with smartphones, where we're completely immersed in the network and in our phone. And relationships have become kind of, I don't know, extensions of the phone. I just can't imagine it. What are the benefits? I mean, these are all unanswered questions. I mean, the transparency, I guess that seems alluring, especially for governments and regulators. They like that idea. The public doesn't like that idea. They'd rather have some anonymity. Is that going to be a big conflict? I mean, right now, there is no public blockchain. We have nothing to point to that would suggest how this will actually evolve. Lawmakers are way far away or prepared to make laws about this. How they're going to govern our access. Which in a way seems totally antithetical to the whole concept. This inability to understand what the potential liabilities and the legal roadblocks and the intersections of decentralization with our current systems of government. Where do they come together? What's the conflict? There's going to be conflict. There's no doubt. You know, is this actually the start of this kind of anarchist dream world? Breaking down borders. There's no longer any need for borders. We just have all these small pockets of decentralized governments. I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about. Because if it follows, that we have this sort of decentralized economy, we would have a decentralized culture. I don't know how you separate the two. So I'm also looking at, from an investor's point of view, what is the rate of adoption? Right now, there is no new money coming into Bitcoin. The volume of transactions are continually diminishing. If you were to do some searches or start looking at the employment prospects of people that are entering this force that have, or companies that are looking for blockchain, it represents, right now I think there's currently 1,300 jobs nationwide that are available for blockchain. You compare that to a very mature technology that a lot of people are saying that are going out on the edge, like Java, and there's 50,000 jobs. You look at sales, there's 750,000 jobs. Managers, there's, I don't know, maybe 1 million jobs that are out there. So it represents such a small concern, such a small investment in people and technology right now. And that kind of tells you where global economies and companies and enterprises are actually at the moment. There is also this sort of philosophical edge, that in order for blockchains to be truly decentralized and to have the ultimate in transparency, that they need to be open sourced. All right? So How is that going to fly with the corporations where their intellectual property is really part of their business model? I just don't know. So I'm saying that we're at that phase one, and we're going to be deep into that phase one for a while until we shed all of the fraudsters and the scams that are out there right now that are kind of muddying the waters, and start getting regulatory clarity, legal clarity, liability clarity, technologies that start garnering some interest on a wider scale, a wider level of adoption, and more people coming into this market. That, I don't believe, is going to happen for the next couple of years. Why all of a sudden? We've had Bitcoin now around for almost 9 years, and it hasn't really made an indelible mark all this time. Right? So these are the reasons why. And I have other reasons, and I'm going to talk about it in a separate video in terms of what is Bitcoin in terms of an asset, in terms of a store of value, or as a speculative instrument. You know, what value does it really have? So I'm going to address those in other videos, but for now, I am going to start concentrating more on the aspects of coaching and personal development. What are the best ways to invest in things? How do we prepare for those investments? How do we educate ourselves? How do we garner that knowledge and that wisdom? That's going to be the focus of my channel going forward. So I just needed to say this about cryptos and why I am kind of leaving it behind. It doesn't mean that I'm going to completely divorce myself from it. I think that it needs to still be addressed. There's enough people that are interested in it, and I'm going to be keeping it as part of you know, my portfolio as this sort of speculative thing that needs to be there, just like any other type of speculative part of a portfolio. But right now, I just don't see that it's useful to put that much energy into it. I might be wrong. Might be totally wrong. And I'll switch and I'll turn on a dime if I am. Tell me what you think. See you next video. Coach Ernie, signing off. That might be my new outgo.